In conversation with Arwinder Kaur, Arwinder has woven a captivating narrative that not only delve into the enigmatic human psyche, but also present a candid and heartfelt account of a South Asian family migration to Canada. In her compelling memoir, she shares her incredible experiences as a globetrotter during her youth, providing her with a unique education about the multifaceted nature of humanity. As a social worker specializing in child welfare for nearly 3 decades after attending XFU, she possesses a wealth of wisdom and compassion that shines through her writing. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Awinda Kaur. How are you doing today, Haw?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much. And it's my pleasure to be interviewed by you today. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well to have you on the show today. Having read your powerful memoir, I feel it's very beautiful to sit and talk about it. So once again, thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So Winda, I need to first say that you've written a powerful, overly emotional, extremely moving story. And I would like to start this interview with the story of your mother and the complexity of womanhood. And you may see my interview question that I've set this question based on each titles that I've figured out from the book. Your mother's story is layered. On one hand, she was a free spirit who wanted more out of life. And on the other hand, she was trapped by cultural expectations. You wrote about a decision to leave, which was almost unheard of in the Indian community. Do you truly think your mother found the freedom she longed for, or did she just exchange one set of struggles for another?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question and a very good question. I think it's very complicated, as you point out. Again, we sort of get into what are our personal desires or needs versus the community
Mm,
needs or impositions. So I think you're right. Early on, as I point out in my book, my parents had a arranged marriage.
mm,
She liked to refer to it as a forced marriage.
yeah.
And it was because she did not choose it.
Mm,
And she was also very, very, very vocal about the fact that that wasn't her choice to be married and it wasn't her choice to have children, especially maybe not five of them. So
mm,
I think it was an opportunity that presented itself when she came to Canada, because then she would be able to see around her that women had a different life here. They weren't necessarily bound by, externally imposed traditions, and that she had more choices than she was allowed in India. So I think that did create a definite conflict in the marriage, because
mm,
my father was expected to maintain religious traditional customs.
yeah.
She was supposed to dress a certain way, live a certain way, and my mother didn't want to do that. She was very artistic, very creative, and she
Mm,
wanted that freedom. And so, yes, back in, I guess, early 70s, my parents did separate, and that was very scandalous, in our community, especially back then. It's
yeah.
much more common now. And so that was a real trauma for my father.
Mm,
He didn't know what his life was supposed to be like when the family got fractured.
mm,
My mother was I think, very satisfied that she was able to exercise that freedom and that control.
mm,
But the question of, does that lead to happiness, and does that lead to the life that you dreamed of? Though that's a whole different question, because
yeah.
I think life without struggles doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, you're right. We can exchange one set of struggles for another
Mm,
set of struggles. Because even though she may have really enjoyed that time when we were away traveling, when we came back, she had missed her family very much.
mm,
And the older she got, I think the more she valued and wanted those tight family connections of having the children close by and all of that. So,
absolutely.
yes, I think that she needed to exercise that. But whether ultimately that led to a fulfilling life, that's a little bit more
Mm.
complicated because humans can be so much more complicated.
Oh, wow, that's such an amazing one, really. And I love your description of it because I find it to be very amazing, really. And it's quite shocking how this tradition, it's something that is still in existence today. I'm not quite sure if it's still in existence today.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
people are being forced into it. Hilariously, I had a conversation, similar conversation with an author, I think 3 weeks ago, and she mentioned of being forced into an arranged marriage. Hilariously, I think she was from Afghanistan, yeah. And I was surprised
Oh,
as to if this is still a reality today. She said, yes, it's still a reality
yes,
today. It's
for
shocking
many,
in a
for
world
many.
getting to civilization.
It really is. I think in many of those cultures,
Yeah,
we don't have the same economic systems. For example, here in Canada,
mm,
people can live independently and they have financial options. They have programs.
yeah,
Parents might have social securities or
mm,
pensions or other sorts of things that they can rely on. But in many countries, your children are the ones that are supposed to look after you as you age.
absolutely.
And that I think a lot of what we talk about when we say, well, this is religious, this is community, this is culture, we
Mm,
can really trace it more to economic. It's an
right.
economic. A lot of people say, well, in India, why are the cows sacred? They think this is just purely a religious belief. But if you really look at it, a cow is sacred because economically it provides so much to the
Mm,
community. If you kill a cow, maybe you're going to feed your family for a few days or a few weeks. But the cow, throughout its lifetime, even down to fuel, you use the cow dung, make it into patties, dry it, and then you use that. You burn that for fuel. You
mm,
get dairy, you get cream, you get all kinds of food products from the milk. They use the cow for labor
mm,
so the cow, it's not just sacred because it offers nothing. It offers everything economically. So I think sometimes we do confuse religious beliefs because maybe that's the simplest way for people to understand them. But if
yeah,
you look deeper into it, you will find an economic root for why customs and beliefs exist.
absolutely. I love your take on that. And now let's talk about overpopulation and the future of humanity. Your stance on overpopulation is one of the boldest arguments in the book. You did not just mention it, you treated it as an undeniable force that must be reckoned with. But with cultural and religious belief deeply tied to procreation, do you think humanity is ready, truly ready to have that conversation?
Right. Well, I think that absolutely needs to be ready for it. And I think that it's been a taboo subject, universally taboo,
Mm.
even here in Canada and places
Wow.
where there's free speech. When I was a young person and a young woman, and I knew that I wasn't having kids, I chose that. And
Yeah.
people were very uncomfortable with it. Even women were very uncomfortable with the conversation, and some of them were very hostile almost, and they wouldn't accept my decision. They said, no, 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 you're going to change your mind, you're going to change your mind. And made me really wonder, like, what is going on? Why is my decision making other people so uncomfortable? And then I realized that there's a lot of unspoken things that go on in
Yeah.
people's minds, and women. I think that it's not talked about, and I don't think people think it's appropriate for somebody to say, oh, I don't necessarily want children, or,
Mm,
well, you know what, maybe I had more than I could afford, more than I can
mm,
take care of, more than I could accept responsibility for. And there are lots of men who don't want to have more children, or they don't want to have
mm,
any children, but are they really able to speak that? There's just
mm.
an unspoken expectation. You go to school, you get an education, you get a job, you get married, you have children. That's it.
Circle.
Everybody's supposed to follow this template, right?
Mm,
Um, but we
wow.
have to look at the reality from different points of view. One, biologically, right? The population.
Yeah.
We are we are not exempt from the effects of overpopulation, because if you look at the ecology, even in the animal kingdom and all the other species, they do not expand their population beyond what the immediate environment can
Density.
support.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have mass starvation, chronic suffering in the animal world.
Mm.
Basically, the elderly and the sick and the weak, they don't survive. Okay. And only the dominant male in each herd or whatever is
Yeah.
allowed to pass their genes down. Every animal does not get to procreate, and if they do,
Mm.
it's very limited. It's seasonal,
Mm.
and it's not to the same extent that we do it.
Yeah.
But we, because we're humans, and again, this has partly to do with some our belief systems, our religious belief systems sometimes, which is a view that humans are superior and at the top of the chain in terms of the ecology, but
Mm.
that's not true, because biologically we all have a role in maintaining and sustaining the planet.
Yeah.
So this is to say that, well, are we ready for this conversation? I think, and I pointed out in my book, over 400,000, almost 400,000 babies are born a day. Okay.
I can
Now,
imagine.
when you look at it from an economic point of view, I think we would agree that, first of all, 75% of the Earth's surface is water. So
Yeah.
that means we're actually only living on 1/4 of the Earth. That's not very much space. Okay, so I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out this is not going to be
Absolutely.
sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Then when we look at the poverty, poverty in 75% of the world is struggling. And even in places like America and Canada now, where homeless rates, everything has just gone skyrocketed.
Mm.
Not enough beds for hospitals, not enough schools, not enough, every infrastructure every year in cities is unsustainable. So,
Mm.
what is the quality of life? Just because we can biologically reproduce, that doesn't mean that we are passing to our children a quality of life that's not filled with suffering from the moment they are born to the moment that they die.
Wow.
So, if we care about suffering, we need to look at population.
Yeah.
And that is not getting better, it's getting worse. And with tornadoes, fires, all of these things that are happening, our ecosystem, which is the biological infrastructure, is being destroyed. And that
Mm.
means less places for people to live, less food, less. So these things are going to lead to more conflicts.
Yeah.
We see right now, we have President Trump beside us saying he would
Honestly
like to
speaking.
take over Canada because
Imagine
we
that.
are a big country. We have lots of resources. So these can cause lots of problems beyond our own immediate families and our immediate lives. So
Mm.
I am pushing for this conversation, and I, whenever possible, talk about that. We have to start understanding that having children is a choice, and it must be a choice.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that we can say that it's as widespread as we like to believe, that every single woman wants to have children and everybody
Wow.
wants to have, big families. Because if that was true, why in America right now are they outlawing access to reproductive health for women and denying them birth control or access to safe abortions? If women all want to have babies all the time, why do we need to impose these kinds of things on them?
Wow. These are deep conversations. It's amazing
Well,
answer. It's amazing answer you've
very,
got in there. And this is very thought-provoking. One that feels as if I'm in a class listening to a lecturer deliver a speech on this particular topic. I found it to be very lovely and very great.
I
Thank you
would
so much for
love to be
sharing.
speaking about this topic as much as possible. Is very important.
Absolutely. Now let's go to Western social system and their shortcomings as revealed in your book. You've worked in the Western social service system for many years, and in the book, there is a subtle critique of its approach. Do you think the Western modern actually helps people, or does it create a kind of dependency that prevents true resilience?
This is another very interesting topic. And again, my work as a social worker gives me unique insight
Mm.
into the lives of children
Yeah,
in situations where they're not wanted or loved or taken care of.
yeah,
And again, we get back to the individual versus community, right? And so if we say, well, it's up to each person to decide if they want to have children, even if they can't look after them, that's their business. But as I point out in my book, if we
mm.
look at it from a community and a tribalistic sort of
Point
society,
of view,
it
yeah.
affects the community. So when we have children, for example, that are neglected or abused, and in many cases, as I point out in my book, many of the children that are now taken from their parents, had to put into custody or care of foster care, are children who have been born addicted to substances and to drugs. And
Mm.
these children have lifelong struggles. And some of them do okay, and many of them do not. And eventually, these children leave care and they have to try to make it in society, and they're not having an easy time. If
Mm.
they have deficits in their development, in their capabilities, in their cognition, many of them are simply unable to survive in the
Mm.
outside world, if you want to put it that way. So many of them go into delinquency, criminal behavior, they may start doing drugs. All of these things lead to a deterioration of our sense of well-being in a community. And
Yeah.
many of them do end up in an institutional setting because they require that external structure to help them
Mm.
with their day-to-day functioning. So
Mm.
individually, they're suffering, but the society suffers because these are individuals that need lifelong support and care, which we
Yeah.
simply can't provide. So,
Yeah.
on the one hand, Western society promotes individualism, promotes independence, but it doesn't actually teach resilience. And you
Mm.
can't have independence without resilience. So, in
Absolutely.
tribal societies, for example, children are pretty independent and they can sustain their lives. They know where to go find water. They know how to find food. They have a very, very resilient way of living
Yeah.
early in their years, and that
Yeah.
makes them more independent. But
Absolutely.
here, for example, even in Canada, that's not the case. There are people who are remaining in their homes with their parents into their 40s and 50s. Some
Wow.
of them are not moving out. They're not getting a job. They're not finding ways to solve their daily problems. And example I give in my book, which I think is very, very interesting, is the whole idea of mental well being and our connection to nature.
Mm.
So, for example, as I pointed out here, for example, if somebody has a fear of crossing the bridge or going outside,
Yeah.
agoraphobia is a fear of going outside. So, we don't teach resilience. What we do is we create a system so that they don't have to leave their house.
Yeah.
Somebody will go in, maybe they'll shop for them, they'll bring their food, somebody will come into their home. So instead of saying, why does this person have a fear of going outside, how do we address this so that they can go outside, we just accept that that's their condition and that's how they have to live.
Mm.
But as I point out in my book, if you have to go outside your home to get water, if you have to go climb a tree to get your coconuts or your food, you are not going to have a fear of heights. It's
Mm.
impossible because
Absolutely.
starvation will dictate that you have to get out and you have to find water and you have
Yeah.
to do these things. So, this is
Absolutely.
where we have forgotten and we're disconnected from our reliance to nature. Nature tells us what we must do to survive, and we
Yeah.
do it. But in the Western culture, we don't teach that kind of resilience. We don't teach that kind of connection to the natural world. We provide too many alternatives for people to now. It's even easier. You click on your iPhone and you just get order something and it's coming. You never have people never leave their homes anymore. You know, it's too easy. So this creates all kinds of other issues, right? Like
Yeah.
lack of social skills, lack of talking to people on the phone, lack of having real friends. So
Mm,
these are very all interconnected things. And I think that we are less resilient. The
mm,
further away from our connection to nature, the
mm.
less resilient we are as individuals and even as a community.
I like the fact that these are actually subjects that pertains to humanity, subjects that pertains to everybody. I love your take on that, really. And it's very, very becoming extremely obvious and a huge matter of concern, to be frankly speaking. A
Yes,
huge
yes.
one. Thank you for sharing. I love your take on this, really. Thank you. One of the things that stood out also in your book is your emphasis on community in India versus individualism in the West. Do you think Western culture has lost something valuable by prioritizing personal success over collective well being? Please tell us more.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always a need for balance. Any kind of extreme positions can be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So, in my own situation when I was in India, and this was, of course, in the 70s, very different now. It's
Wow.
become much more open in many ways. But
Mm,
our individual decisions were not for us to make. They were collective decisions, and we had to always make sure that the community was accepting of what we would wear, what we would do, how we would speak, how we
yeah.
would dress. All of these things were dictated by the community, which we found very oppressive, and
Mm,
really we couldn't understand. And
mm,
because we thought, well, why is that somebody else's business?
mm,
But this is how cultures are maintained, and because again we have economic situations, people
mm,
can't just be driven by individuality in India. I mean, there's over 1 billion people over there now. People can't
mm,
just say, you know what, I don't like living at home. I'm going to go move out on my own. That's not really much of an option. So you kind of have to maintain that strong family connection because
mm.
everybody's living in very small spaces and they have
Yeah.
to live with each other. They can't just go and move out on their own.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, I found that even here, the sense of community is very, very strong,
Yeah.
and parts of it are amazingly positive and productive because you have that built in support system. And when people are in a crisis, especially in the Sikh faith, they are extremely helpful and very generous people.
Mm,
They will give freely to total strangers. So you never have to worry. In my culture, I can just go down the street to a Sikh temple and I can have free Indian food, vegetarian Indian food every day if I wanted to, for
mm,
free. They don't question anything. They don't try to convert you to anything. It's just called Community Kitchen, God's Kitchen. And so there is a very, very strong sense of taking care of their community. And that's a
mm.
very wonderful thing. On
Right.
the other hand, depending on how much that is, we were talking about this earlier, if there's forced marriages, forced situations,
Yeah.
that's perhaps now we've gotten to an area where it's gotten too extreme. That's
Wow.
not balanced, right? We need a
Wow.
balance between our individual desires or wants and perhaps what our community needs are going to be.
Mm,
We can't all just be individually focused and not caring about anybody else or anything else. I think that's happening with the young people now, and they spend all their time online or
mm,
posting selfies and doing all these things which don't help the community, that they're not
mm,
doing anything to benefit the community, right?
mm,
Posting selfies all day does not help the world better itself necessarily. So there needs to be a balance. We need to have some individual self autonomy where that's needed in really big issues like getting married, having children, that sort of thing.
Mm,
But we also need to take care of each other, and we need to have a healthy, supportive community in which we
mm,
can rely on each other because government programs are not enough and they're never going to be enough, as we
absolutely.
can see that all
Yeah.
around.
Oh, wow. That's I mean, I love your take on this, really. And I can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, really. It's quite beautiful, quite
We'll
amazing.
have to have another session another time.
I think
Part
we
two.
should actually, because this is very beautiful and very amazing, quite evocative as well. Quite evocative as well. So
You.
thank you. Thank you once
Thank
again.
you.
And now let's go now on the role of activism and personal responsibility. Your book is not just a personal story. I think to me it is a manifesto, a call to action. But with corporation and government agencies controlling so much currently nowadays, do you believe individual activism is still powerful enough to drive real change? If yes, how do you believe so?
Well, I mean, ultimately, let's think about it. As I point out in my book,
Yeah.
the people that have created the most amount of positive change in the world are not politicians.
Mm,
They
they're
are activists.
individuals. Mm,
Jesus was an activist, right?
mm.
He believed in social justice and humanitarian justice. So we have Nelson
Nelson
Mandela,
Mandela.
Martin Luther King,
Absolutely.
Mahatma Gandhi, Gloria
A
Steinem,
lot of
all
them.
of the people that have created the most amount of change in the world are people, activists who have done the right thing. They believed there was something that was wrong with society, it needed to be changed, and people followed them. These were never, none of them were elected officials or politicians. So
Mm,
I think we have to stop relying on them to
government.
do the right thing because
Mm,
they are trapped in a big machinery. The political world, which
yeah.
is tied in big corporations. We're seeing that right now with
Yeah.
Trump and Tesla and Amazon and all these things that are going on right now. What happens when you have people with so much money can buy politicians, and then we have the media, which does not report the truth. And these
Mm.
are the conditions that lead to all of the world's problems that we're having right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we can't say, oh, we need to rely on the politicians. They're going to get this together. No, it's not going to happen. So if you look right now in Serbia, which has not really been widely covered on the news, again, it's the media. They don't want to
Mhm.
promote these kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
They are out there literally, 300,000 young people in Serbia are on the streets. It's a huge, massive movement.
Yeah. I think I saw
And
that.
they are protesting the
Yeah.
corruption in the government.
Absolutely. I
And
saw
this is
that.
where change starts happening.
Yeah.
Even in the States, people have now been outraged with some of the things that Trump and Tesla, Musk have
Doing.
done.
Mm.
And these things have gone to court and people have protested. There is a lot of pushback, and some of these decisions have now been reversed, actually.
Yeah.
So, this is the only thing that will work. And this is what we must do. We
Yeah.
cannot sit back passively. It has to be a call to action because this is our only planet that we live on. We have to take care of it. It is dying in a sense. We can see the destruction and the damage around us. And the
Mm.
way that we're living is destructive to the planet and it's destructive to billions of people with the benefit of the few, as you point out, the rich
Yeah.
and the powerful. So, this is the most important time right now.
Mm.
Activism is important because, yes, one person, they may be one person, but they're not doing it alone because hundreds and thousands and millions of
Backing them
other
up.
people follow them. And it may
Absolutely.
not be right away, but it will happen much quicker than if we try to just sit back and say, oh, let the politicians solve these problems because
Mm.
they're not
Absolutely.
invested in solving them.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. Because sometimes if you sit back and leave everything to the politician, they will mess up the entire thing and make life miserable for people miserable for the citizen, miserable for nationals, and it becomes very unbearable to live and even breathe. So that's why
Yeah,
I love your take on the actually. While I was setting that question, I was like, I'm not quite sure, but I want to hear from you because currently it's quite hard. And sometimes what this government official does is the fact that once they see that you're trying to speak against them or you're trying to rise
mm,
up as an activism, they try all possible best to shut you up. Nigerian, for
yeah,
instance, they may even try to silence you in one way or the other, either by giving you some bribe or trying to just, assassination, etc. But
exactly.
sometimes they are doing quite a lot. So it now depends on somebody. Somebody like Nelson Mandela, he went to prison how many
Yeah.
times? It was in prison. Like, do not ever speak over. So there's a lot that government officials are even doing to silence the upcoming activists. But it's good. I love your take on that, really.
And Nelson Mandela was continued to be very effective and powerful, even from behind the bars of
Yeah,
a prison.
yeah.
So it didn't stop by
Good
arresting
stuff.
him. And
Mm,
this is what happens when people have principles that they are willing to fight for,
yeah.
and in some cases die for.
Mm, mm,
People want that. They want that in a leader, and they're never going to get that in a politician because that is not the system that has been,
absolutely.
erected. You become part of a machinery. You're no longer able to speak what your principles are, what your
Yeah.
values are. Must do sort of the party line,
Mm,
the CEO that has to always defend the company no matter how awful it is what they're doing.
mm,
So this is what happens. Sometimes people start off, with very good intentions as politicians, but they soon
mm,
find it very frustrating because their hands are tied. They are not
mm,
able to make decisions, and they're not able to make things really any effective
mm,
changes. There's too many forces that are working against them. But how do
mm,
you work against somebody like Mandela and
mm.
millions of people that are out on the streets screaming and shouting and not giving up? They can't silence all of them. That's where the change
Absolutely.
comes from. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love your take on that, really. Very true and quite amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for mentioning. And also, Okwinda, indigenous knowledge versus modern system. You argue that indigenous knowledge holds the key to restoring ecological balance, but in a world so deeply tied to modern system as we currently see today, is it truly possible to return to that way of living? What does a practical middle ground looks like?
I mean, I know people say, well, we can't all go back to living in a, tribalistic society and so forth. But what happens is that poverty and hardship create all kinds of sort of systems. Like when I was in India,
Yeah.
people recycled and reused not because it was politically correct, but because it was economically necessary. And that
Mm,
is what's going to start happening is, well, resources start dwindling, people have to
mm,
find ways to find either alternate ways of doing things, or
mm,
right now we have to see that so many of our conflicts around the world are tied to availability of resources.
yeah.
And when you had, for example, COVID,
Yeah.
and suddenly things weren't available, we couldn't ship things, we couldn't do a lot of things, we saw people adjusted, people found other ways of doing things. And I think that until things start affecting people directly,
Yeah.
we don't think it's a problem. You know,
That's it.
overpopulation, that's not a problem. But now here, people are saying, hey, where there's homeless people, there's people without a place to live, there's people, we can't go to the hospital, we have a long waiting list. All of these things, once they start affecting us individually
That's
directly, then we start thinking this is not right, we have to do something, right?
that's why we know
So
that there's a problem on ground.
that's one thing. The other thing is, for example, right now with this whole free trade thing that's going on with America, this is now forcing Canada to say, well, how do we become more self-reliant? How do we do things where we can use our own resources for our own country and our own people?
Yeah.
And some of the trade barriers that we have within Canada, within different provinces, those are being lifted. And we're saying now, look, buy local, buy things that are made in Canada.
Mm,
So these are things that will happen organically because we won't have any other options. What
mm,
I would like to do, again, politicians are less, reliant to do this. Again, we have to push for it. But it's a very simple formula that nature lives by. And I point out in my book, nature has a blueprint in how we have to live. For example, in nature, everything that's used comes from the earth, goes back to the earth.
yeah.
There's no such thing as waste in nature.
Mm,
Everything is from the earth, goes back to the earth.
absolutely.
Nature, animals don't outstrip its resources. They maintain a balance between population and what's available to
Mm,
reduce suffering. That's what it does. It reduces suffering.
mm,
So that's another issue. They also don't hoard food. They don't have factories and warehouses stocked with food. Why do we do that? Why don't we all have enough to eat for a few days, maybe? Not storehouses full of food while other people are starving, right? So there's
mm,
the distribution problem. All of these are profit related issues. We
yeah.
people are lacking resources because money can be made from them. But when you think
Yeah.
about it, Earth's resources are for every species on this planet. They're not just for humans.
Yeah.
And without trees, we can't breathe the air. There's no
Oh,
air, there's no oxygen without plants and trees. We
mm,
don't realize every time we keep clear cutting the Amazon or other forests, we are degrading our availability of oxygen. And if we're not keeping the air clean, we
yeah.
can't breathe the air, which will literally kill us within a minute or two. We can't survive without air.
Yeah.
So these are all things that we think we don't have to care about, but without them, we can't survive.
Mm,
So it's going to be a matter of necessity. And I think we should push corporations at the front end. They should be producing things that are biodegradable. And there are lots of options. Cleaning
mm,
supplies, we can use vinegar. There are so many options of things that we can do. And it's not a matter of that they're not going to make money. They will still make money. They'll just make them from things that are less harmful
yeah.
than things that are toxic. So we
Yeah.
have to push the corporations to change what they're doing. And we can do that by refusing to buy those things.
Mm. I love your take on that, really, and it's very true. Now, most people will not realize the danger of something until they be in that shoe. They won't realize the danger that, there's overpopulation until there's no space for the homeless people. You won't realize that there's a danger of, there's shortage of hospitals or shortage of doctors until you go to the hospital and realize that there's nobody to attend to you. You won't realize that there's a shortage of food until it happens to them they won't. So everybody just feels everything is fine, and we're just going. And when people talk about it, like, what are they talking about? What's the pill? Because you've not experienced it, you've not been in the shoe. When it gets to you, that's when you understand that. Oh, now I can see what these people are actually talking about. It's the reality.
Yes,
It's the
exactly.
reality.
I think one example of where the government sabotages what the people want is a good example is in the States with the whole gun lobbyist and the availability of guns. Majority of the people in America do not want the sort of access to guns that people have there, and they're the leaders of mass shootings globally. And yet, even though this is the will of the people, politicians refuse to do anything about it. And this is an example of where politicians that are like that should not be in those positions. This is a clear example of where they are acting against their own country and against their own people and the
People.
safety of their own community and their children. And yet
Mm,
they can do this for decades. The decades this issue has been fought, and it continually gets ignored because there's money from the NRA, the gun lobbyist, and they're paying politicians to not change those laws. And what happens? It's like a war zone living in America with the gun violence that goes on. Children can't even go to school.
Every
They're
day.
worried about
I,
getting
I
killed
read
every
about
day.
it today, and I was like, how would the government even license everybody to be I can't imagine anybody carrying a gun to walk about in England. It's not safe. Everybody can just actually just shoot, boom, yeah, they're gone. You just keep shooting every now and then. It's
Yeah,
crazy and
it is
unbelievable.
really
I
crazy.
was like, I cannot
Very
live in
crazy.
such an environment where people are carrying gun. I can't even walk in safety because I'll be scared.
Yeah. And this is the problem. And this is where people have forgotten. They have power. And the people that are continually sitting in those seats
The
in
seat, yeah.
Congress or, governors,
Lawmakers.
different people, they need to start enacting laws to prevent these conflicts of interest and prevent corporations from giving large donations. This is part of the problem because that is a conflict of interest. If Musk is giving Trump $400 million, you don't think Trump is going to give Musk whatever he wants? Of course he
Hmm.
is. It's clear examples of this.
They're
This has to
controlling
stop,
it.
and we cannot expect corporations and the politicians to do the right thing because they're not doing it, and we
Hmm.
have to fight against that.
That's amazing, really. That's really amazing. I love your take on that. I'd like us to go back now to the story of independence and sacrifice, which I found to be quite lovely and beautiful in your book. I love it so much. There's an interesting contrast between your father's structured, disciplined life and your mother's yearning for something different. Looking back, do you think your mother's decision to leave changed the way you see independence and sacrifice?
I think in some ways, yes, I think she was happy to leave. She did have
Mm.
many years where I think she really was able to exercise that freedom.
Wow.
And she was, loved music and performing and dancing and theater and just to be able to do what she wanted without any constraints. And she needed to live that out for a while, and she
Mm.
did. But ultimately, she had other issues. Namely, she did suffer a lot from, depression and those sorts of
Wow.
things. And I think over the years, she felt very isolated in Canada. She started yearning for India, and she would always talk about it in very nostalgic terms. In
Oh.
India, the streets were always bustling with activity. People were out and about. People would just come and visit. You could go to their house. You don't have to phone.
Nobody
You don't
goes
have
to
to wait.
anybody else here in Canada.
And she loved that. She said, "Here, everybody sits in their own homes. Nobody is
The
visiting. No,
beauty of
everybody's
it, yeah.
busy."
Yeah.
So ultimately, she yearned for that sense of community that she had when she was in India. And I think that that is interesting because when you look at wanting to live in a very independent, individualistic life, I think this is a youth oriented, a youth driven time of life when we
Mm.
want that. And as we get much older, we don't necessarily want to be, busy all the time,
Yeah.
but we want a sense of belonging and we want a
Absolutely.
sense of, people caring about us and us caring about people. And I think
Absolutely.
that that only, comes to us as we age and as things change. So I think so much of those kinds of decisions have to do with what stage a person is in their life.
Mm.
And my father didn't necessarily need that. He always had that strong sense of identity through his religious activities, through his
Wow.
community. And that was always his the strongest sort of sense of values was being part of a community and
Mm.
having his family. So they both came to the similar things as they got older. They ended up
Wow.
actually getting back together, not as a couple, but as they got older, they actually lived together in the same house again.
Oh.
Yeah, so they did sort of reintegrate as a family, and my
Oh,
father
wow.
lived with me and everything as well. So yeah, it's interesting how things are about timing. And also my mom and dad, there was quite a year, like 15 years difference between them.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
I think she got married when she was like 18,
Oh,
so
wow.
she was very young. She was at a different stage of her life. She wanted to pursue a career. She wanted to go to Bombay, be a movie
Oh,
star,
wow.
all of that sort of stuff. So she got snatched from that, and I think she had that yearning that she never got to live that. But after you've done that, then what, right? What's the next phase? So yeah, so we have
Yeah,
to remember. I think I point out in my book that we have to remember there's a very vast difference between our needs and our wants. And so much of what we do in our lives, we haven't learned to differentiate what is an actual need and what is a want.
yeah,
And once we can do that, we can realize that we have many of the things we need. But like Gandhi says, there's enough for everyone's need, but
yeah,
not for everyone's greed, right? So
absolutely.
our wants are limitless, and that's what so many young people want, right? They
Mm,
want this, they want a car, they want jewelry, they want nice clothing, they want, but what do we need? We need clean air, clean water, soil, place to grow food. Those are needs, not
yeah,
wants. So that's what we have to fight for, are the needs, not the wants.
absolutely. I love your take, really. And I can go on and on and on and on and on and on talking about it, really. Thank you so much for mentioning. Just before we wrap up, I know you already showed the cover over there, just beside you. But I'd like you to show to the camera while you talk about where interested viewers can get a copy of the book on.
Yes, well, of course, it's available on all the usual. This is the back.
Beautiful cover
This
you've
is the
got in
front.
there.
And
Oh,
it's available on my website, but it's available on all the Google. You can, I don't want to say Amazon right now because of all the boycott, but we have, for example, here, Indigo, which is our local
yeah,
Canadian bookstore.
indigo, yeah.
So you can get them if you put my name into the web, into Google, it'll come up. The book will come up, and I'm sure it'll show locally. Actually, I have to say, because I lived in England as a youngster for about a year.
Oh,
We did. Remember, in my book, I worked in a sewing factory with my family. So
oh,
we actually lived in England, probably from 72 to 73, maybe. So
wow,
because of my father and us living there, there's actually more books being sold in the UK than
wow.
there are in other parts of the world. There's a bit of
That's
a following over there now, because
wow,
my father was so revered. And also, I talk in detail about our life in London when we were there.
wow,
And so I think it's created a bit of interest. So, yeah, the book is called Living While Human. And there's pictures and all kinds of things of, my journey.
yeah,
And I think that it's been recommended for young people, for like high school, college, and universities.
upwards.
So I think if this book could be more popular with that age group, then I think that this gives, as you say, a manifesto or a template for what people can do in their lives to create the kind of change, the global change that we're looking for locally, globally. There's all kinds of concrete ideas and solutions
Oh,
in here, which I think are very helpful if people want to have that
wow.
vision.
Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, a lovely
Thank
one,
you.
a great one that is quite educative, quite heavy and pulling. I'm excited that you can take the time to come up and talk about it and answer my questions. I find it very amazing and quite lovely, and I'm very grateful to that. And just for the sake of viewers who are watching, I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of the book on all the purchase platform, Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, Indigo, everywhere. I also left link to, all's
Mhm.
website and social media pages for possible followings. So thank you once
And they can
again,
also
Arwinder.
contact me.
This was
They can
great.
contact me from my website. They can
Yeah.
email me. So that is arwindercoreauthor.com. And drop me a line. I would love to hear from people if they have any questions. I'm more than happy to get connected. That would be really wonderful to do that. So
Yeah. Thank you so much. And this was quite great.
thank you. You take care.
Yeah. Thank